So, in one of my previous videos, I mentioned that I work with many languages. And in order to do so, you kind of have to know something about these languages, at least something. But at the same time, it's pretty much impossible to learn that many languages in order to work with them. So what I really do in order to get familiar with languages fast is going to be the topic of this video. I already mentioned language patterns, which is basically the name for the core of the language, the main principles that the language is based on. But before we proceed, I just have a couple of disclaimers, okay? So, disclaimer number 1. A language is a tool, and what I'm going to suggest today is a technique how you can get familiar with a tool fast. What you are going to use this tool, aka the language, for is out of the question now. And by the way, there are actually many more purposes than just one, like to talk to other people. And this particular technique may cater better to those other purposes. Another disclaimer, it's a method to understand things fast. And I truly recognize that it may not be the perfect technique for learning a language. So many people recommend learning like toddlers do, through immersive learning. And while it is a great idea, it has some nuance, which is the time that it takes. The toddlers do have all the time on their hands, but we actually don't. So sometimes we just need to get familiar with things fast, and this is the case. So I suggest, I don't insist, use this technique when you need. Okay, so now I'm not going to waste any more of your precious time, and back to the topic. So the main idea here is to try to avoid approaching a language like a full body text, and to try to break it down into separate structures as early on as possible. You can try this technique just as a fun research activity for an evening. It will give you a brief introduction into the language, and probably it will make it less overwhelming for you if and when you do proceed with learning the language. So what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to take a look at the alphabet of the searched language. Don't try to remember it all, just go through it and find something that catches your eye. This will serve like the lighthouses in the body of unknown text later. By the way, I guess you wonder what you should do if the language does not have the alphabet. Well, in that case, just skip this phase, and I'm going to give you a tip on how to work with such languages a little bit later in the video. Now that we've looked through the alphabet, what we need to do is to get a sample sentence. You can get it from any text that is available to you. Sometimes I just search through YouTube comments if I'm interested in a video in a certain language. So we get a sample sentence, and that's where we go to ChatGPT. However, if you don't have ChatGPT available in your country, if it is somehow restricted in your country, you can use, well, Google Translate for that case as well, but it is going to take a little bit more time and a little bit more effort. If I go to ChatGPT, I just use the following prompt. Translate this sentence and explain the grammar behind every word in the sentence. I guess you can get similar results by using a different prompt, but this one works for me pretty accurately most of the time. And if I use Google Translate for that, I just delete certain parts of the sentence until I understand which word stands for which meaning. After that, just take the separate words that you found and go to any online dictionary that is available to you and find the infinitives of the verbs, the original forms of the words, and so on. Also, after dissecting the sentence into separate words, we're going to look at the word order and the topic and subject used in the text. Regarding the word order, nouns and verbs are fine. They stand in the same positions in most of the languages that I tried this method with. However, it is the adjectives and the adverbs that get thrown around the sentence a lot. The easy example is the difference between Romanic languages and Germanic languages. Romanic languages such as French or Italian, and English is a Germanic language. So in French, the word order regarding adjectives would be the following. First of all, it is the noun and then it is the adjective most of the times. Like un jour merveilleux. But in English, it is going to be a wonderful day. The adjective goes before the noun. But why is the word order important? Well, that's actually because our thoughts depend greatly on how we structure them. And in order to get a similar idea from one language to another, sometimes it takes a lot of effort to do so. Just because the original idea had to be twisted around a completely different structure. And that's when you get to understand why some of the languages are quite easy for you to understand right from the beginning when you just started learning them. And some languages, they will just make your brain hurt before you actually start to understand something. Also, it is great to understand whether this language is topic prominent or subject prominent. A topic prominent language is a language that organizes its syntax, its structure, in order to emphasize the topic of the sentence. Such languages are Chinese, Japanese, Korean, for example, but English, on the other hand, is actually a subject prominent language. So if I say, I'd be more than grateful if you give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment, it is quite a common structure for English. However, if I want to translate this into Chinese, the structure is going to be kind of reversed. So, depending on what type of information we are looking for, we're going to focus our attention on the first or the second part of the sentence. In order to understand some of the word building patterns, we're going to take separate words. I prefer to use adjectives, adverbs, nouns, and verbs, because these are the words that get us the most of the information. Thankfully, after the previous step, you'll be able to get these separate words from the sentence pretty easily. So you take the words and use the following prompt. Explain the word building behind this word. This is when you get the basic information regarding the grammar of the language. And this is where I usually focus on ifs rather than hows. I just want to understand if the language has plural and singular forms, if the language has conjugations, and so on. I don't focus on how to do that. I just try to figure out whether it has certain grammar features. And finally, it's time for the tricky part. Some languages, though, do have higher barrier to entry. And those are the languages that do not have the alphabet. So what do you do in this case? In this case, we just need to get familiar with the key words that define the structure of the language. For example, these are the pronouns or the conjunction words like because, so, and so on. Try to memorize some of them like you do with the alphabet if the language had one. Then do the same step of breaking down the sentence into separate words and focus on the structure of the sentence. So the major advice that I can give is to avoid approaching a language like a pile of words. While it can be a more natural approach, it takes time, as I already mentioned. And if you want to get familiar with a language fast, first focus on the structure and only later deal with the filler information. By the way, in my work where I don't have to create things from scratch, I just have to check them. And I do trust the people who worked on the text, who worked on the audio. This approach where I just get familiar with the basics, with the structure of the language, helps to resolve at least 50% of the issues that I may encounter when I interact with a language that I don't speak. Honestly, it's just easier to Google a certain word and get a spot-on answer right away, rather than to try and translate the full sentence and just pray that the meaning is okay. Because without understanding the structure of the sentence, it is going to be very difficult to check whether everything's alright. So even if you have a trusted source, it is just much better to be able to check things when you understand the structure of the language. Okay, so that was a brief introduction into how you can get familiar with pretty much any language fast. And I hope it will help you with your something, like your work, your research, studies, whatever. Please let me know in the comments if you have any other tips on how to get a head start when learning a language. And if you agree with the idea that learning a language doesn't always need to be a full-time commitment. Sometimes it can just be a casual field for experiment that you walk into out of curiosity. Like, let's go in and out, 20-minute adventure. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching, and please remember to hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you in my next videos.